Awesome. So thanks again for joining us this afternoon to talk about finding your fit in counseling and clinical psychology programs. Professor Musser, please take it away.
Right. I'm gonna start by just sharing my screen. I've got just a very, very short slide deck that I can share with everybody. I think you're seeing the right screen. Are y'all seeing the screen that just has the finding your fit? Beautiful, wonderful. So I've just got a very brief couple of slides, and then we're going to turn it over to our panelists. And this evening, our panelists are myself. I'm Erica Musser. I'm an assistant professor here at Barnard College, Columbia University, and I am a clinical psychologist. And I'll tell you all a little bit about what that means exactly. We also have with us tonight Katie Schmarter. Katie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah. My name's Katie. I use they, them pronouns. I'm currently a fourth year at FIU in the clinical science program. And I'm really excited to talk with you all today.
Thank you, Katie. We also have Cordelia Zong.
Hi, my name is Cordelia. I'm currently a second year student in the counseling psychology program just up the street at Teachers College, Columbia University. I'm actually also a fellow Seven Sisters graduate. I graduated from Wellesley College.
And then we have Andrea Caro.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm a first year PsyD student down in Miami at Nova Southeastern University. And yeah.
Thank you. And then we have Katie Black.
Hi, I just recently graduated with my master's in social work and am in the process of getting licensed right now. I work at Florida State University in a child clinical psych lab.
And last, but certainly not least, this evening we have Victoria Howard.
Hi guys, I am a second year master's student getting my degree in professional counseling at Florida International University.
Thank you so much, everybody. So I wanted to start off with just a quick breakdown of the different degrees that will allow you to do clinical work or counseling. So these are some of the different degrees, and I've got just brief descriptions of each of these, and then we can do a deeper dive for those of you who have questions. But there are some different fields you can go into. So some of those are medically based fields. So in the medical field, there's the psychiatrist, psychiatric nurse practitioner. Then there are psychologists. So there are different kinds of psychologists who can do clinical work or counseling, including clinical psychologists, counseling psychologists, or school psychologists. And then at the master's level, we have folks who can do counseling or clinical work like social workers, licensed mental health counselor, marriage and family therapist. At the bachelor's level, we have folks doing things like board certified behavior analyst, licensed behavior analyst. And then there are also some certificates you can get, like becoming a registered behavior technician, and some other folks who might also do some clinical work or counseling, like a life coach, but there's not really any regulations presently on who can be a life coach. And then there are other folks too who provide clinical work or counseling, folks who identify with specific religious affiliations, pastors, preachers, rabbis, etc. So starting with psychiatrist and psychiatric nurse practitioner, who we unfortunately don't have represented tonight on the panel, but I can provide a little bit of information. And then I know Beyond Barnard has a lot of information about different health professions. Both psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners can provide therapy. They can provide medication, although a nurse practitioner generally does so under supervision. They can also order a variety of different medical tests, labs, etc. They can also be involved in research or academia. And then I have the training that I believe is required for both professions listed out here. So a psychiatrist usually does 4 years worth of undergraduate study, usually taking pre-med courses. They take the MCAT, which is the national test to get into medical school. Then they generally do 4 years of medical school, a 4-year-long medical residency, and then certification or licensure after that. And then a nurse practitioner usually does 4 years of bachelor's work in nursing. They take another license, or not licensure test, but a test to be able to get into their master's program. Master's program in nursing is usually 2 years, and then again, certification and licensure. And some also go on to get a doctorate of nurse practitioning, which is usually an additional 2 to 5 years. Usually folks who get their doctorate in nurse practitioning are folks who are going to want to go into academia or research rather than clinical care, although some folks with a doctorate in nurse practitioning also do clinical care. So that's the medical side of things. As I mentioned, there are different types of psychologists as well. There are clinical psychologists who generally focus on psychopathology and mental health conditions and treating psychopathology and mental health conditions. Clinical psychologists can either have a PhD, which is a doctorate of philosophy, or a PsyD, which is a doctorate of psychology, and that's a practical degree, a practice-based degree, whereas the PhD tends to be a little more focused on research, but we can talk about that a bit more as well. Counseling psychologists generally either have a PhD, a PsyD, or sometimes they have doctorates of education. If their program is housed within a department of education, sometimes they'll get an EdD. And generally, the difference between clinical psychology and counseling psychology is a focus more on everyday challenges in counseling, stressors. A lot of counseling programs these days are also focused on issues related to social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion and access. But again, there's a lot of overlap between counseling psychology and clinical psychology. Then there's school psychology, which again, PhD, PsyD, or EdD. The focus here is usually on children and teens, specifically in their lives in the school system. So these folks oftentimes spend their days doing academic testing, intelligence testing, other kinds of neuropsychological testing, and then constructing individualized education plans for students at school. All of these different types of psychologists can provide therapy, they can provide assessments or evaluation, they can provide consultations, and they can also do research or academia. The training generally is 4 years of undergrad. A lot of schools require the GRE, although it's becoming more and more optional, and that's the graduate exam. Sometimes they require the general exam, and sometimes they require the psychology specific exam. And then the doctoral program, many offer a master's degree along the way, and then it usually takes another 4 to 5 years to complete, plus 1 year of internship. And then if you intend to go on to get licensed, many states, but not all states, require between 1 and 2 years of postdoctoral work. So once you get your doctorate, they require you to do supervised clinical hours. And then there's the licensure and certification, which usually is 1 or 2 tests, depending on what state you're in. So the clinical psychologist licensure exam varies from state to state, whether it's the national exam or the national exam plus a state-based exam. So the degrees I broke down here, but again, there's lots of overlap among them. PhD is generally a research-focused degree, but many folks who get a PhD also do clinical practice. The PsyD is a more professional degree, but many go into practice, and some will also do research or academia. And then the EdD is usually, again, a professional degree with the majority going on to practice, but some going also into research or academia. Master's level therapists, there are social workers, licensed mental health counselors, and marriage or family therapists, and we have some of those represented today on the call. These folks, again, can provide therapy, they can provide consultations, they can do research or work in academia. Most of these are master's level degrees. There is a PhD available also for social work, and most folks who get a PhD in social work work in academia or research as well. For these, it's usually the bachelor's degree, GRE again, and then a 1 or 2 years master's degree, oftentimes followed by a year-long internship and then licensure exam. So those are the degrees that we'll be talking about tonight. And in terms of sort of general advice across the board that I have for you, I would say know before you go. So apply to programs that'll get you to the type of degree that you'll need to do the work you want to do. So you really want to be certain before you start applying to programs, the specific type of work, the specific populations that you're interested in working with, either clinically in a research setting, or if you're interested in teaching. I would also make sure that you research the requirements of the different types of programs that you're applying to. Different programs have different prerequisites and want different types of application materials. So you'll really want to make sure you're familiarizing yourself with what those requirements might be. Accreditation is really important. Different bodies accredit different types of programs. So for example, in clinical psychology, counseling psychology, school psychology, it's APA, the American Psychological Association, the same one that you all have to learn the APA formatting. They dictate APA formatting, and they also do accreditation of different programs that are clinical counseling or school psychology programs. And then master's programs have different accrediting boards. So you want to make sure that the program that you're applying to is accredited, because later when you go up for licensure, different states require that the program you're coming from have been accredited. Mentorship can be a huge difference in getting accepted to some of these programs. Even something as simple as having a conversation with somebody who's been through the process can be very helpful, which is part of the reason that I wanted to get all these folks with these different backgrounds together tonight, to be able to chat with some of you about their experiences. And then I think it's also really important to know the average costs of these kinds of programs. So some programs can have really steep tuitions, whereas other programs can pay your tuition for you, and some programs will pay your tuition and also offer you a stipend. And usually in exchange for that stipend, you're doing something like working as a research assistant, working as a teaching assistant, or working as a clinical assistant in somebody's laboratory or one of the clinics that are housed on campus. So it's important to know that as well. Just to keep in mind as a good, thing to know before you get started. In terms of the general application requirements, almost all of these different types of programs require a personal statement of some kind. This is similar to the kind of personal statement you probably would have written to get into your undergraduate program. They also often require a CV, so a curriculum vitae or a resume detailing what some of your experiences have been. Some, but not all, require test scores. Like I said, the GRE is pretty common, but it's becoming, I think, less and less common. Most programs that I'm familiar with also require letters of recommendation. I think 3 letters of recommendation is usually the magic number, but that can vary from program to program. And then a lot of the programs you'll look at also have an application fee that has to be paid. Some programs will require a writing sample, and some programs will require research experience prior to acceptance, and some will require actual clinical experience prior to acceptance. So it's important to know that information before you apply as well. And then I have a little bit of advice about personal statements. The first bit of advice is don't get too personal. I know they're called personal statements, but it's really looking for you to highlight why you're interested in this occupation or field and what kinds of experiences you have that make you a good fit for this type of program. So these usually include a little bit of brief background information, a discussion of why you're interested in that occupation, field, or the long-term goal that you have set for yourself. It usually involves a description of your work to date, so what you've done thus far to get you on track for that job or goal, and the descriptions of what the next step in your journey might look like, so why this type of program is the logical next step in your training. You usually want to emphasize why this specific program is the one that's right for you. You'll apply to lots and lots of programs, but you want to tailor that personal statement to each and every program differently to make sure that you're highlighting what it is that's uniquely attractive about that program for you, whether it's the mentors, opportunities to work with specific types of populations. And then you also really want to highlight what you bring. So what do you offer based on your prior training, work, experience that fits with this specific program, providing very specific evidence about what types of experiences you've had that make you uniquely suited to this program. Another piece of advice that I don't really have on here as much is you also, to some extent, want to make your personal statement really ring as a story that you've woven to sort of sell yourself. You want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. You also want to sort of make the experiences that you've had seem very agency filled, very purposeful. So I chose to do X experience in order to gain Y experience to set me up for the next thing. So I've read personal statements from folks before, drafts of personal statements where it reads like, I did this, then I did this, then I did this. But you really want to indicate to the folks reading that statement, what were you looking to get out of that experience? And then what did you get out of that experience? So that's it. I do want to put in a bit of a plug for Beyond Barnard. I know that they have a lot of resources available to students. Everything, I think, from looking at CVs, helping you put together personal statements, helping you make connections. And I think we'll have some time as well for any questions folks have for how Beyond Barnard can help. But like I said, the little intro here was meant to be brief, and I feel like I've already taken more time from the panelists than I wanted to. So I'm going to turn it over now to question and answer with the panelists. I'd love it if folks in the audience have questions, if you want to raise your hand in the Zoom, and then I can call on you and you can ask your question. And don't be nervous, don't be scared. Everybody on the call is very, very friendly. I have personal experience working with almost everybody on the panel tonight, but not quite everybody, but I'm sure that they are a wealth of information and can answer the questions that you have. So with that, I will stop my show and take a look again, stop my share as well, at all of your smiling faces, or at least your little avatars, those of you who have them. And yeah, if folks have questions, please feel free to raise your hand or let me know otherwise. First, I see Carissa Song.
Did any of you guys choose to take a gap year before going into grad school, or was it like right after your bachelor's degree?
Panelists?
I can jump in. So prior to entering grad school, I did 2 years as a research assistant at a medical university, which was a really nice experience. I think oftentimes undergraduate students can't get all of the wealth of experience and potential like publications or posters that to fit that all in alongside taking classes full time can be tricky. So I think having that extra opportunity to build some research experience and maybe even clinical experience along the way is really important.
Yeah, I can echo what Katie said. I think among those in my program, most people took time off between their undergraduate career and their grad school career, at least entering the doctoral program. I personally spent 6 years working. I did apply once for grad school in the interim. Um, didn't make it, took some time to then kind of reassess my research interests and find a job that more closely aligned with that before successfully applying the second time.
And then I guess I can offer the flip side. So I'm in a master's program and I went straight from undergrad through. I was really nervous to do so because I heard that a lot of people suggested taking time off. And I was like, what if I'm biting off more than I can chew? But it went really well for me. I think in my program, there's a nice mix of people who have taken breaks and some people who've decided, as well as me, to just go straight through. So it really depends on how burnt out you are from undergrad, because everybody's journey is different. So definitely take, a mental scan of yourself and see how really are you feeling, how dedicated are you to doing that much more work, because whether you choose master's, PhD, PsyD, it is a huge toll on your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Not saying that you can't do it. Of course, you'll be successful, but you do need to go in prepared. So just kind of taking that as well.
Andrea, I know you went straight from undergrad to the PsyD, is that right?
So I had a little bit of a weird situation
Yeah.
because I got my first bachelor's degree in international business, and then after spending some time there, realized that I wanted to go into this ID. So even though I applied to my program with the business degree, I went ahead and continued another bachelor's in psychology. So I graduated in the summer of 24 and I started in the fall of 24 with my psych.
And Katie Black, did you take any time off or did you go straight through?
Yeah, I took time off both between high school and undergrad and grad school. And overall, I think it was really great for helping me develop what I was really interested and motivated in making the sacrifices to pursue. So I highly recommend it, although um, you got to choose what's right for you for sure. But I was on track to go from undergrad to working in a lab as a research coordinator to a clinical psych program. And that gap year actually really helped me figure out that wasn't the ideal path for me. And so, yeah, just it was great for me if you, particularly if you feel unsure or you're not kind of lacking motivation. In one direction or another. There's a lot of opportunities to work, gain experience, self-reflect, and it's not wasted time.
I also quote unquote took time off. My journey was similar to Katie Schmarder's in some respect. I worked for 2 years in a research setting before going back and getting my PhD. And I actually also in that time completed a master's degree in human development, which is a related but separate field, while I sort of searched for my calling and what exactly it was that I wanted to do in the long term. So I think it's pretty common, certainly not required, but fairly common to take a little bit of time, especially if you're planning to go into a doctoral degree, to take a little bit of time to get some extra research or clinical experience under your belt. Laura asks, what type of degree and experience are required to work as a counselor in a university setting?
I think I can help with this one. So this one is there's a lot of different options, right? So you can get your master's in counseling and work in a university setting. You can also get your PhD or your PsyD in counseling and work in a university setting. So it depends on what exactly you mean by university setting as well. But if you just mean like working in that office, like were you speaking with students, then yeah, I think the lowest requirement would be a master's. But then of course that also varies on university. So if you're looking at a specific university, look at their specific requirements, but a majority of them you can get through with a master's.
Yeah, oftentimes university counseling centers have a variety of different folks with different degrees, ranging, like Victoria said, I've seen folks with masters in counseling, I've seen MSWs, certainly PhDs and PsyDs, and oftentimes psychiatrists will be on staff there as well. And then Alexis says, for those who went the direction of clinical practice, what timeline do you believe is optimal for students to follow after graduating? Laura, or I'm sorry, Alexis, did you want to give us a little more information maybe there about what you mean exactly?
Yeah, so I think it was kind of covered already. Generally, I was just asking about like in terms of whether or not people had taken time off to like prioritize research and whatnot. So I think mine was actually covered already, but thank you.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on your question. All right, up next we have Eleanor, who says, do you have recommendations for seeking out research or clinical experience during undergrad?
I can jump in. I did multiple research experiences as an undergraduate, but I had a bit of a difficulty finding it. Wellesley being a small liberal arts college, we didn't quite have as robust of a research program as say like a, larger state university or private university might. So in terms of clinical work, I did do several internships that were offered through my program itself, where they placed us at mental health centers in the community, and we got to kind of work there for 8 hours a week. In terms of research, I honestly had the most luck just looking at all of the different universities in the area. With Wellesley being so close to Boston, I just looked at labs that were there and sent cold emails to see if they were looking for research assistants. A lot of them will have information on their website about if they are looking for RAs. But oftentimes, if I didn't see that information, I just sent an email to inquire, and that's actually how I got most of my research.
I will say it's been a little bit, it's been a little while for me, but if you have many faculty members in your department of interest that represent kind of what you want to pursue. Like you can identify somebody that you're like, wow, I want their career. I really like their research. It's almost similar in a sense to finding a mentor and for grads programs. So finding somebody in your undergraduate institution that has that path that you want, and then like seeing if you can get involved with their research, I think is like a really great way to start.
I'll also say it's fantastic if you can find somebody at Barnard or Columbia or Teachers College that does exactly what you want to do. Reach out to them for sure. But if you can't, a lot of your professors also have connections with other folks in the greater New York City metropolitan area. We're really lucky that there are so many folks doing such cool research here. And so if your professors have a connection, I'm sure they'd be willing to help you to facilitate reaching out. I know some different folks at Barnard have done research internships at NYU, and that's great. Not everybody, at your institution does exactly what you might want to do. I'm also going to put in a little bit of shameless self-promotion. If you're interested in child, adolescent, or young adult neurodevelopmental disabilities, ADHD, autism, intellectual disability, that's my area of research. And while I'm not currently running studies because I'm brand new here at Barnard, I will likely start recruitment in the spring or summer, and I will be looking for research assistants. So hit me up. All right. Next up, we have Priscilla, who says, hi all, how did you choose your degree program among all of the options? MSW, MHC, MFT, PsyD, PhD, etc.
Okay, I can start. Maybe it might be best for the panelists. I think we're all different, so maybe if we just all go in order. For me, I chose a master in counseling. I was going back and forth. I wish I could go back in time to my undergrad, trying to figure out what was the best course of action in psychology. I thought everything was interesting and wanted to somehow do it all. So I made a list of my pros and my cons and what was really important to me. So for me, it was getting clinical experience. It was understanding what counseling is and how I can do it. And then as far as a PhD or a master's program, I thought the PhD was interesting. I'm still interested in getting my PhD, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to commit that much of my life yet to it. So for me, the master's program made more sense because I would do a little bit of school, I could work, I get a license, I could start my own practice. And then if I want to go back and get my PhD, just gave me a little bit more wiggle room and a little bit more time to make a comprehensive decision, kind of like what everybody else is saying. So I wasn't wasting time going after something I wasn't positive about and then changing my mind midway through and realizing it wasn't what I actually wanted.
I can hop in next. So for me, it was just being able to kind of get into all different kinds of contexts like schools or clinical work or research labs and see what fit me best. Then I was able to determine that even though I loved research, what I really, really loved was the clinical aspect. So then that helped me choose between a PsyD or a PhD.
I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be going in the right order. Um, there was a lot of reasons I chose the Masters of Social Work program, but I think what would be most helpful, like generally speaking, is going back to that talking to people who have the job that you would like to have. And then also sometimes you think the person has the job that you want to have. So I thought that being a child psychologist looked a lot different than how it really was once I started interacting with professionals who were had that background and qualifications. So trial and error is huge. And then really reflecting and deciding like what is most important for you to pursue. I really specifically wanted to work with very underrepresented people groups within child welfare and but still wanted to be a psychologist. But then the more I talked to trusted mentors, they were like, I think it's just social work. I think it's just social work. And I was like, okay. So that, and then I think also the program fitting your learning style really well. So I had to be honest with myself that I felt a lot of existential dread about committing to a 5 to 7 year program. And with social work, you can do the master's program. And then if you decide that you want to do research and be in academia, you can then get the PhD without having to do the full, it's an additional, I think, 2 to 3 years. So with the social work program, I can go through licensure, which then I can practice independently with a master's. And then if I can pursue specific modalities of treatment that I would like to be certified in. And so that kind of, I don't know if a la carte is the right way to put it, but that really fit well with the way that I approach my career and my work-life balance. So that also helped. So reflecting on those two things, what areas do you really want to focus on? And then which program maybe fits your learning style and your approach to your career best? Sorry, that was long.
Katie and I both unmuted at the same time. I think we're maybe a little bit similar between the two of us. I knew I wanted to do research. I find a lot of joy in it. And so much so that upon my second cycle of applying for graduate school, I was actually considering whether I just wanted to go for an MPH and just go full research, just ditch the clinical work altogether. Eventually, though, I you know, a lot of my research interests are in creating mental health intervention / prevention programs. And I think working in those research areas, especially if I were to apply for grants later on in my career, they would want to see that I have the experience of providing therapy to be able to do research in this setting. So that was one of the things that pushed me towards the PhD as opposed to the MPH. Another is also kind of the wider variety of options of career choices I might have as a PhD. You know, I do have some interests in maybe going into policy work, potentially going into kind of nonprofit, more administration kind of roles, and you do have a bit more flexibility in those regards with the PhD. In terms of the counseling psychology, it's a little bit ironic that I'm here as the counseling psych representative. I sort of ended up here a little bit by accident. You know, when it comes down to it, counseling and clinical, you are trained to do the exact same things. It's just the research areas that can be a little bit different. As Dr. Musser said before, it tends to be a little bit more wellness focused. There's also much more of a multicultural lens to our training than you might find in a clinical program. A lot more people in the program will tend to be more clinically oriented, like more practice oriented. It just so happened that the advisor that I applied to work with, her work happens to kind of lie on that boundary between clinical and counseling, tends to veer a little bit more psychopathology focused. So that's how I ended up here at this program.
Yeah, so for me, I think that a lot of these answers from others really like ring true as far as making sure that the degree that you're seeking out is really going to get you to that end point, which I think that Erica really nicely outlined towards the beginning of the presentation. Just to add something else into the mix, I think that really thinking about logistics. It's not always the top of the mind, but when you're thinking about which programs are going to cover tuition, are going to potentially pay you a stipend, depending on what position you're in life, it may be more or less feasible to pursue certain degrees depending on that. So I think that there is also a piece, and I'll also echo what Cordelia was saying. I really liked the flexibility of this specific program and the fact that I could have a lot of different various options. I could kind of flow in and out of clinical work, research, and I really liked that idea. And at the same time, I was like, it would be really nice to have my tuition covered. And have a stipend and just like have a little bit of that peace of mind. So I think that it is a huge commitment. And I think that that's super, super important to keep in mind as well. I don't think prior to coming into the PhD program, I exactly fathomed how long 5 years is plus internship. I'm almost to the point of fathoming that as I am now in my 4th year. So I am learning exactly how long it is. So I think that there's a lot of life things, there's a lot of career goal things and like dream things. And then there's also the logistics part that you have to think about as well.
You all. Laura says, for those who did research before entering into grad school, what are some tips and tricks in applying for these? Was it a priority to get a publication upon entering the research area?
I can talk because I did spend 6 years in research before finally coming back to graduate school. And I think it's kind of, I think it also depends on where you are. I was mostly in Boston for most of my time working outside of school, and it is a tough market in Boston because there are just so many research institutions up there and everyone's there because they want to work in research. So it can be very difficult in applying for a job. I think with any research position that you're applying to, there are going to be many, many, many applicants. And sometimes it might involve a bit of flexibility on your part, you know, so you might say like, you know, I want these 4 research interests to be covered in my job. And sometimes it just doesn't work out that way, especially with a lot of research positions. They're grant funded, so you're at the whims of whether or not this person managed to secure the grant and when does that grant funding end. So the timing also may not work out the way that you want. Again, I applied a lot of the similar tactics I did in undergrad, just cold emailing a lot of people, like whether or not I saw a position open within the either the academic institution's website or the hospital's website, regardless of if I saw a position, I would reach out to them and just see if there was anything open. And one thing that you should really keep in mind is that a lot of people might come back to you and be like, no, I don't have a paid position, but would you be interested in volunteering? Really keep your priorities open. It's okay. They understand if you come back to them and are like, I really love your work, but right now I can only take a paid position. So know where your boundaries are, especially in those places. I would say in terms of getting a publication, that's really going to depend on your principal investigator. Some labs that I've worked in were really open in allowing their research coordinators to join publications. Some weren't. Again, timing is also an issue. You might just join a research project solely for the data collection stage, which means you're very unlikely to get a publication out of that particular research project. But also be flexible in what data set you work with. So if you're coming in only on the data entry stage, don't forget that your PI probably has previous data sets they've worked with before. See if they would be open to letting you submit a poster with any of that data. I would say maybe the priority is not to focus on publications per se, but just to focus on output in general.
I think also briefly adding on that, thinking about the timeline in which publications happen is super important when you're thinking about the application cycle. They take a long time, so keep that in mind and like get some advice from the principal investigator on that. A poster might be the way to go if you're trying to get that bang for your buck in time for your application. So I think thinking about some of those logistics is really important as well. And I really liked Cordelia's answer. I think she's right on the money there with PIs have these papers that they are tabling forever and they want to revive, or so we always have, I think, like other projects that we want to be able to get to, and having those extra hands sometimes is really welcomed, I think, from PIs.
Any other panelists want to comment there? It's okay if not. Okay. Carissa asks, what kind of careers do you hope to go into based on the type of degree that you're pursuing?
I can go ahead and jump in. So right now I'm working in a child clinical psych lab. I'm their research clinician. And so I'm doing the clinical work that's part of the research program that we have here. My goal is to work more in child welfare. I'm really interested in being on a multidisciplinary team that staffs child abuse cases. So the goal would be able to be with cases from the time of case opening and investigation all the way to treatment planning and follow-up. So yeah, kind of recent that it's that specific, but that's my goal.
One of the worst questions you can ask somebody in graduate school is, what's next? Sorry, guys.
I can go next. I think career-wise, what I want to do has been thrown in loops since going into graduate school. I am currently doing my internship at an outpatient mental health facility, dealing primarily with bipolar, schizophrenic, and schizoaffective individuals. And then at FIU's master's program for psychology, our first year is spent at CCF, which is Center for Children and Families. So we get a lot of work with kiddos with ADHD and dealing with their families and helping the parents understanding how to navigate what that looks like, especially if they're just now finding out about the diagnosis or any other usually outwardly presenting diagnoses. But we also have MINT, which is anxiety. So all that to say, that was a lot of words to say that there's a plethora of things that I've been introduced to recently. And I think now, being at the end of my, or almost being at the end of my master's, I still want to at some point open my own clinic and provide therapy. But I would also be interested in potentially working with a nonprofit. And then if I can somehow juggle another thing, I would like to be a teacher for undergraduate students at a university. That was a lot. Sorry.
I can jump in. I know this is a hard one to answer. I am, as I have always been, leaning more towards the research end of things. And I think like my extensive experience with clinical work in the process of getting this degree has like kind of confirmed that for me. So I I am much more leaning towards research, but it's good to be involved clinically to see kind of like what the practices are. I think that's like super important to have your yourself in that area, so you can feel like you have like relevant information and experience directly with that. So for me, I'm really interested in furthering disability justice via providing neuroaffirmative supports for young adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And so what that would look like for me is more of the research end of things, being a PI on grants to investigate that, and also working with inclusive post-secondary education programs, which provide opportunities for those folks to get a like university-based experience while not being like a traditionally enrolled college student. So I'm really interested in the work that those programs do and like researching that.
I'm quite early still, just in my second year of my program, but because I did take such a long time off between undergrad and grad school, I feel like I had a lot of time to think about this. I definitely know what I don't want to do. I don't want to go into private practice, and I'm not looking to teach. So ideally, I'm hoping to end up most likely in a hospital setting where I could spend most of my time doing research, but also be able to fill some hours doing clinical work, either providing individual psychotherapy, or I've really enjoyed my assessment practicum. So also maybe spending most of my time outside of research providing assessments.
I'm also really early in my program, so it's harder to say. But so far, I've been very interested in childhood grief and bereavement. So I started working with research labs that focus on that, and I'm under a mentor who is an expert in the field.
Thank you, guys. Candace says, how useful do you think experience as a registered behavioral technician might be, either during or right after undergraduate, prior to applying for psychology graduate programs, especially if I'm looking to eventually work as either a clinical psychologist or a therapist? Anybody have thoughts on that?
I can answer from the therapist perspective. There are quite a few people in my program who became RBT, sorry, prior to joining, and I think it really depends on what population you want to work with. If you want to work with adults, depending on the type of adults you want to work with, I'm not positive how much it could help, but I will also say that any experience can be good experience regardless of what you're trying to do, right? Because you can become an RBT or go on the path of becoming an RBT and realize this is really not for me. And that might help you determine, what type of program would be next for you. But as far as whether it will give you a leg up or not, any experience I think is good experience when applying to a graduate program. And for us, I know a lot of the RBTs were appreciative of being able to lean on those skills when dealing with some of the other kids that we saw, because they had already seen that. So they knew how to navigate when a child is like screaming in your face and you have no idea what to do. But others were like, I wish I had ignored the RBT and just gone straight through. So kind of another one of those things where determining what population do you want to work with. And then at the end of the day, especially if you know what psychology graduate program you want to apply to, you can always ask. Like, I think Cordelia brought up a great point with the cold emails. A lot of people love talking about their programs, love giving advice to future students. So don't hesitate to reach directly to, whether it's a student that's in that program, a professor that works within that program, or like the program coordinator. Definitely ask. And if you don't know who to ask, if you reach out to something like this, where you have a forum of people, this is like a great way to find those answers too.
Yeah, Victoria makes a great point. And I do want to like carefully add or just sensitively add specifically about RBT companies. When I lived in Miami, there went through a period where those businesses were popping up like left and right. And there was a lot of hearsay, whispers about them not really being conducted in the most professional or ethical ways. So just if I think that the core of it could be very useful and helpful in building clinical skills, but just do your due diligence in investigating about that specific business company who's running it before jumping in. That's all.
I think on the lens of doctoral programs, it really just depends on what your research interests are, and particularly for PhD programs, who you're applying to work with. Um, most PhD programs will understand if, it's kind of hard to get clinical work, especially if you're like looking for something paid. I personally just had volunteer work on my CV before I applied. It certainly is great, as Victoria said, to have some experience just to know that this is something that you want to do before you apply to a program that's going to involve a lot of clinical work. But I think like specific positions or specific kinds of clinical experience will really just depend on the PI that you're looking to apply to and what they may be looking for in a student. And that's really hard to gauge on the other side.
We can move on to the next one. Sophie says, what are examples of clinical and research experience that you gained before applying to graduate school?
I mean, I try to go with Victoria's suggestion to go in some kind of order, but I'm not sure if people see the order that I see. So anyway, I was at FIU for my undergraduate program, and they have a lot of ADHD research there. And so I was part of a lab that was actually focused on reading, but they had a summer internship program that provided clinical opportunities. So from 7 in the morning to 7 at night for the majority of the summer, I was working with preschoolers with ADHD. I see Victoria shaking or nodding because I'm sure you're super familiar with the program as well, STP. And it broke me a little bit, but it was very useful in building a lot of strong skills and endurance. So I think it helps. I'm not sure where everyone is located, but sometimes your university is like has distinguished professors or experts in specific fields, and so really asking around that sometimes they have more experiences for clinical opportunities and so on. So it depends on the setting. And then I was a research coordinator for 2 different labs, which is a long story, but after I graduated, I wound up working for 2 different labs. And let me see. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, so being a clinic coordinator is just a helpful experience overall if you are trying to figure out if you want to be in research, because you get paid to do it and you get a lot of exposure firsthand to the research process.
I don't know if I'm messing up any order. I also don't know. I think maybe we're all seeing a different order. But I will reiterate that I was at an academic medical center during my 2 years off from undergrad, like in between undergrad and graduate school. During undergrad, however, I did like identify that person that I was talking about that you want to find that like does what you want to do, or at least at the time what you want to do. And just offered to kind of help out with any like ongoing projects. So I was able to get trained on like a live coding method and collect data. Was able to write up like a literature review and eventually like bachelor's paper from that. So I think that was a really nice experience, but not really a traditional like undergraduate lab experience that I think a lot of folks get, especially at like R1 universities. And then during my time, like my gap time, I actually went and worked in the addiction sciences division at a medical university, which was like a complete 180. So again, it's a little bit of like take what you can get and then kind of spin a narrative from that, which I think Erica was talking about with the personal statement. Sometimes takes a little creativity, but I believe that you can get there. And yeah, during my time there, I was both a research assistant and a program coordinator for that lab. And I would say during that time, I got a lot of unofficial clinical experience in that I was working a lot face to face with participants, but not in any sort of like formal clinical role. So I was really someone that came in with no clinical experience whatsoever into a clinical science PhD program. So I really chose to prioritize research experience.
Yeah, I think I wanted to echo a bit of what Katie said as well, is that there's no like right or wrong thing to do. It's really all about, as I think especially for doctoral programs, it's how you can take the skills you gained from your experiences and spin them into the narrative of why you are a strong candidate for whichever lab you're applying for or whichever program you're applying for, and then highlight where the program can help you grow. So I think, you know, it really is okay if you end up being like, oh, I have this experience and I'm worried it doesn't seem right. It's all about how you spin it and the skills you manage to gain from those experiences. So for example, you know, I did a psych I was an RA in a psych research lab in my undergraduate career, and then my first job out of well, I actually had two first jobs out of college. I did a fellowship in Taiwan, translating, had nothing to do with my psych career. I don't even talk about it in my personal statement. But my second job after that, I came back and I worked in an emergency medicine lab as a research coordinator, which is completely not in my field. But through there, I worked on a national study gathering data from emergency departments all across the country, learning how to do phone interviewing, and I actually got an opportunity to have my first author manuscript through that. So, you know, research area was totally not aligned, but it's all about the experiences you get and how you spin that.
Okay, I can go next. I couldn't tell if it was Andrea or me. For me, I didn't get a whole lot of clinical experience prior to applying to my grad program. A lot of my clinical experience I got a lot while I was actually in it. But beforehand, I did do a lot of research experience. I went to undergrad in New Orleans, Louisiana. And so I went at an HBCU, and a lot of the research that we did was focusing primarily on young children and, well, really just children in general, without the entire state of Louisiana, and understanding the disparities in education and understanding the disparities in how they were being ridiculed and or punished for behavior, and whether there was race involved. And in Louisiana, it was kind of across the board, yes. So we did a lot of research. I spent 3 years doing my research in that and became the head of the research lab that I was in.
So one aspect of clinical work that I noticed helps people a lot when they go into grad school is working as a psychometrician. Because when, at least in the PsyD program, there's a lot of that assessments work, and the people who had backgrounds of, being a psychometrician, it just helped them go through the program a little bit easier. So I would definitely recommend that if you're interested in assessments.
So for folks who might not know, a psychometrician is generally somebody with a bachelor's degree who is working with somebody who is a licensed psychologist and administering the different types of tests that a psychologist might administer under the supervision of a psychologist. That is something that I'm sure you would be able to get some experience with here in New York. Lots and lots of folks doing assessment. And again, not to do too many shameless plugs for myself, but my research involves a lot of psychological testing, And I'm always looking for folks to help out with that, not necessarily as a full-time psychometrician, but Andrea in particular also helped out in my lab when I was in Florida, and she was trained on a lot of intelligence-based testing and academic achievement testing as well. So I do think that that can be a good experience for folks. And it says, would it be useful for me to get a concentration in public health with my psychology bachelor's degree during undergrad if I'm considering working in mental health treatment within a hospital or inpatient setting in the future? Would it add any value?
I mean, I guess as someone who was considering going for an MPH over my PhD, again, it all depends on your research interests. I mean, if you're not hoping to go into research, maybe not. If you're just looking to go into clinical work, maybe that time might be better spent going out and looking for clinical experiences that you could have and maybe not spend that time in class. But if you're looking to go into research, I think it could certainly offer you a lot of different perspectives, maybe even help you flesh out your research interests, and maybe even expose you to just different faculty who you could do research with. Again, I think it just all depends.
Any other panelists have thoughts about working on a public health degree concurrently or public health related classes? All right, that's okay. And then the last question that we have in the chat is from Rachel, who says, I'm currently divided on whether I want to pursue medical school or clinical psychology PhD/PsyD. Does anyone have tips on narrowing down my interests and deciding? And we do still have time for more questions. We've got this is booked through 6 o'clock. So if you have more questions, please pop them on over in the chat or just go ahead and raise your hand virtually and we will ask your question. But that question, again, was about trying to decide between medical school or clinical psychology PhD or PsyD. Anybody have thoughts there?
Oh, sorry, I'm talking a lot, but my best friend is actually currently applying to psychiatry residencies. I like to joke a lot that she's encroaching into my territory. I would say and we've talked a lot, right? Because, she's trying to come to New York as well. It is very different going through medical school to become a psychiatrist. It's like two different worlds. You're all focused on medicine. You have to take all the same classes, you have to do all the similar rotations. And really, as a psychiatrist, there's less of a focus on the therapy aspect of the training. And, even in residency, it's rare for psychiatrists to get that training in providing therapy. And a lot of people I know who have gone the psychiatrist route have said that, they have to go elsewhere to find that training. So really depends on your goals. Of course, if you're looking to go into research, there certainly is a lot of overlap in the research perspective, but in sort of the clinical perspective, it's going to be very, very different.
Yeah, I think if psychology is your passion, I would definitely recommend going that route because I think echoing what Cordelia said, the psychiatry training is going to be super, super medical. Um, I know a lot of people that were in your same spot and were deciding during undergrad or even after undergrad between the two. And I think their decisions ultimately came through taking like pre-med coursework, even like studying for the MCAT. They were like, no, this is not for me. So I think, in kind of like testing out the waters, you can, and like just getting generally more exposure, like reading research that comes out of both like the medical field as well and like psychiatry as well as like clinical psych, I think is also a great way to kind of orient yourself to how these various like problems are conceptualized. So that's my 2 cents.
Says, do you have any advice about deciding whether or not to pursue a master's degree in psych separately, separately before potentially pursuing a PhD or PsyD, or enrolling in a program that allows you to earn one with your PhD PsyD, especially if you're unsure about whether or not your end goal is to become a clinical psychologist or therapist / mental health counselor?
I think I can shed a little light on this one. I would say that if you're unsure about whether or not or what your end goal is, then to either look at master's programs or look at PhD programs that won't. There are some that if you go through the program and you drop out and you get your master's, the master's is null and void. So make sure that if you go to the PhD program, you go to the PsyD program or the master's, whatever it is, that you will leave with the degree upon leaving if things don't go out the way that you want them to. That being said, although the master's program you usually have to pay for, I always highly encourage, if you don't know what you want to do, to go down that route just because of the variety of experiences you get to get. And the amount of exposure you get to different things, and that allows you to clarify your interest and also build skills so you're not just twiddling your thumbs while trying to figure out what is the best course of action for you. Yes, I hope that helped a little bit.
Also, there's a difference between a master's, like a clinical psychology master's program, and an MHC program. An MHC program, you will get clinical training and you will be essentially be starting on the path towards becoming a licensed mental health counselor. That is not the case in a clinical psychology master's program. That is purely research focused. If you have any inclination towards wanting to be a therapist, I would not recommend going towards a master's in clinical psychology.
Yeah, bouncing off of that really quick, that was a great point. That was going to be my next thing. And I was like, I feel like I forgot to say something. In general, if your career interests go towards conducting research, teaching, specializing in assessments, then you're probably looking more towards the PhD route. If you're even thinking about therapy, counseling, being in a clinical practice, then that more goes in line with the master's at least initially.
I will say, as somebody who taught at a PhD program for 10 years and somebody who graduated from one myself, somewhere around half to more than half of our graduates, even from a very rigorous, one of what I think is probably the best PhD programs for child clinical in the nation, half of the graduates to 75% of the graduates go on to do some form of clinical practice, and some of that is clinical practice only. So even though it's a very research heavy degree, and you want to sell yourself as somebody who's very interested in research to that kind of program, a lot of students who graduate from those programs do go on to do purely clinical practice, or a little bit of clinical practice and research, a little bit of clinical practice and teaching. And I think that that's probably also the case in counseling psych programs, though I know a little less about that. So don't feel fully pigeonholed by the fact that they're saying research, research, research. You should really love research if you're going into a PhD program, but don't feel like that's the only thing you can do with that degree. All right.
I would say in counseling, in fact, that lean is even more towards practice. Feel like I'm one of the few in the program who has no intention of doing full clinical work, or even doing like more than half clinical work once I leave the program.
Also, like kind of piggybacking off of that too, I think a lot of the programs, at least the clinical science or clinical psych PhD programs, will kind of like let you know up front whether it's more clinical focused or more research focused, and you can even see their models of training that they have, and really like kind of dig into those, because I think that's important. And I am doing way more clinical work than I thought I would be. So that like, and I was intending on like doing more of research focus. And I think specifically like the institution that I'm coming from like really sells itself as like a heavy research focus, because we use like research milestones to advance in the program. And a lot of my peers, like Erica was saying, get very tired of the research milestones and say, wow, this is not for me. And it's nice to have that like thing to like go over to and still feel passionate about in clinical work. Yeah.
Sophie asked, does anyone have tips on how to sell yourself to labs if you don't have lab experience? Should I try to learn SPSS, gain any other specific skills?
I did a lot of interviewing undergrads who were interested in joining our lab for research experience. I think if you're okay if you do not have experience, at least for my lab, that was fine. We're really looking for professional skills at that point, which is, are you going to show up on time? Are you going to answer emails? So I think any experience that you have working out in the world is really helpful. For my lab, it was really helpful if you have worked with kids before. So even if you've done some babysitting, nannying, we wanted to know that you could interact with kids because that was part of our lab, but we were okay with not having research experience. That's why I joined here. But you can always, like, if you had done research methods class, pop that in your resume and let us know what grade you got if it's a good grade. So you can kind of, like, the theme of this whole talk has been like how to sell yourself and think about what experiences have helped you develop as a person and as a professional, and then really just go forth with those confidently. Yeah.
Yeah, as somebody who has also hired any number of undergraduate research assistants, either volunteer or paid positions, most folks I would say who come to me wanting to work in the lab don't have a ton of research experience, especially for those volunteer positions, or enrolling for course credit, which is also an option at Barnard. You can enroll sometimes in an independent study, which can be a research experience where you get course credit for that. Really, usually what I'm looking for is, much like Katie said, people skills, right? Can you have a conversation with somebody? When you meet me, do you introduce yourself and, offer to shake my hand, or in a post-COVID world, at least, acknowledge who you are and why we're meeting? I usually look for somebody who's willing to commit to at least 2 semesters, only because we teach you a lot of skills. So there's a lot of training that goes into you becoming a research assistant. So we don't expect you to come in with skills, but we train you on those. And then we want to see you be able to use those skills. So it's usually somewhere around a half a semester of training. And then, we don't want you to just go off into the world after that semester and not having had the opportunity to use those skills. We also usually are looking for somebody with not perfect GPA, but we don't want working in the lab to get in the way of your number one priority, which should be your studies and doing well in school because you're in school. So I also am usually looking for somebody who that's not going to be an issue. So, and just somebody who's passionate and motivated and can really tell me, you know, I want to do this because is important to me. So I don't know if other folks have thoughts about that too, but
I think like Erica in our lab, we always had like star RAs, like RAs that really wanted to learn more, and that doesn't mean overextending yourself by any means. Of course, you do need to look out for your work-life balance, school-life balance, whatever it might be. But like, you know, whenever Andrea was an RA, she was very like hands-on with trying to get experience in more training in some of the assessments that we were discussing before. So just like being the first to volunteer to learn new things and do new things, even if those things are scary, I think is really a great sign for an RA.
we've got two more questions in the chat and we're running slow on time or low on time. So I'm gonna turn attention. James asked, for those pursuing a PsyD, why did you choose this route over a master's in social work or health counselor? Once more for the PsyD students, what do you think made you a competitive applicant?
I think that's me. So for the reason why I chose a PsyD over a master's was because I really wanted the option to do assessments and evaluations and be able to write the psychological reports. As for what made me a competitive applicant, I think my CV was well-rounded enough that I was able to prove that I knew what I was getting into and that I liked what I was getting into. But it was also focused enough because everywhere that I went had a similar population that I worked with. So I was able to prove that I had, like you were saying, agency, that I knew what I wanted and I had reason behind what I got into.
This is general question for all. I know we've covered that there are programs that may help pay tuition / offer a stipend, but are there any fellowships or opportunities you know of that master's students or PsyDs can use to help cover tuition costs?
I know for mine, I'm not sure how it is at this specific school, but at FIU, for the master's program, we have something called it's BHWET. We call it BSHWET. And so it's a fellowship that allows you to, we have like a separate class that we attend on Fridays. They cover a semester's worth of tuition and give you a $10,000 stipend, along with talking to other people who are either social workers, PhD, masters, just letting you have a grander understanding of what you're getting into right before you are pushed off into the world. And then we also have to do role plays with paid actors to practice our clinical skills. So there's fellowships, all that to say, those fellowships definitely exist. You just have to search for them. Like, I don't think that they would just fall in your lap necessarily. You've got to like really grind. Asking questions like that in a place like this is perfect. I'm sure Miss Amanda has all the answers to something like that for here. But yes, they definitely do exist. You just have to look.
In my case, I was already working full-time for FSU, and so when I did the master's program, it covered 2 classes per semester, which was huge. I will say it did not cover, I mean, I'm sure it's just going to depend on your university. It did not cover internship hours, which did make up a pretty significant portion of the program. That's something to think about as well for these programs, is that for the MSW, at least, there was gosh, like one semester was like 10 credits of internship hours, and the interns were mostly unpaid. And so you're paying a really hefty tuition and having to work for free. So try to ask those questions first, because just to be able to be mentally and financially prepared for those unexpected portions. A lot of programs will be flexible. You can do them part-time so that you're not paying all those credits at one time, but just something to think about. And then I don't know if we already mentioned this, but assistantships as well. So I have a friend who's in the program right now and she's working, I think like 20 hours a week, and she's getting so she's getting a small stipend and then getting 3 classes per semester covered. So those options are available as well. Just takes a lot of asking around.
I'm not familiar of any offered at my school. However, I do know that if you worked 10 years at a nonprofit after graduation, that your tuition would be waived. I'm not sure if that's for outside of Florida as well, but
Yeah, there are programs that will, if you work in a nonprofit, end up reimbursing your loans, but you usually do have to take out loans in order to get those then later reimbursed. So and most PhD programs, especially ones that are accredited by APA, do offer tuition remission and a stipend. There are some PsyD programs that do. I know Stanford has one. I think Rutgers has a PsyD program that offers some tuition remission and a stipend where you're again working as either a teaching assistant or a research assistant, usually up to about 20 hours a week, which varies depending on what your current role and expectations are. All right, we are right at 5:56, pushing right up on the hour. We probably have time for one last question if anybody going once, going twice? Amanda, do you want to put in one more plug for Beyond Barnard?
Thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Appreciate all of the questions. There's so much thought and really, really great to hear from the panelists. So we really do appreciate you all. Of course, let us know at Beyond Barnard if we can help you. You can schedule advising via Handshake. We do drop-ins Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Lots of ways to get in touch with us. Our email address is beyondbarnard@barnard.edu. So if you don't know where to start, email us and we'll help you out. And again, thanks everyone so much. Have a lovely evening. And hopefully we'll see each other again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, panelists. It was so nice to see some of you again and to meet some of you for the first time. Thank you for coming. We appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.